Ja'Marr Chase and T. Higgins have explained why they wanted to remain teammates in Cincinnati. Let's talk about what they had to say as they met with the media fresh off of signing huge extensions.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Liscow. He's your host, James Rapien, and we are Locked On Bengals on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day on YouTube and everywhere you get your podcast. So if you're new to the show, you're not already an everydayer, you can hit that subscribe button or follow wherever you get your podcast to make sure you don't miss an episode. And today's episode brought to you by Gametime, where when you create an account and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL, you'll save $20 on your first purchase of tickets. The deals are officially official for T. Higgins and for Ja'Marr Chase. They have arrived in Cincinnati. They have signed their contracts. I do not know where they are at this exact moment, but that step is complete. The Cincinnati Bengals have locked up their receivers for the contracts that were agreed upon in recent days.
Huge news to get it done. And it's a big moment in Bengals history. And as I'm recording here, I'm at Paycor Stadium. And look, it's something I honestly never thought I would see. I just didn't think that they would sign both Ja'Marr and T up until 3 months ago. Up until you find out about Joe and how Joe viewed it. And by the way, Joe views it like I think a lot of smart football people view it. You're going to hear a lot of dumb football people say, "Oh, well, how can you pay these two receivers?" And I get that. And the reason I say it's dumb is because it's really easy to see why the Bengals would go this route. It's really easy to see why they would say, "Oh, 26-year-old T. Higgins, we will buy that stock for the next 4 seasons. We will obviously buy every bit of Ja'Marr Chase. We've seen what he's done since entering the league, but T. Higgins has been awesome. And you want to keep those kind of players, and for them to keep both of those guys, it's a huge day for the Bengals. It's a huge day for T, huge day for Ja'Marr. And again, for the majority of T's tenure, I don't think that there were many realistic scenarios where this happened. And yet Joe, Ja'Marr, and T made it happen. And part of that is sacrifice on T's part. Part of that is selflessness on Joe and Ja'Marr's part, or the fact that Joe's just willing to be blunt and outspoken when it comes to T's status. But Ja'Marr being really unselfish during this process, and T sacrificing not necessarily money, because he never got to the free agent market, so we don't know exactly what he would have taken, but sacrificing all of the headache and drama, squashing that, being mature about this process, and realizing that he wanted to be in Cincinnati. So it took a lot to get here. And, Bengals fans, the Bengals are here.
Yeah, it was very well orchestrated. You got to give the players credit here for getting what they wanted done with a front office that we've talked about on repeat over the last 5 years and longer, but on this show for 5 years, because that's about how long we've been doing this show together, for how stubborn they are and how they don't move off of numbers and how they don't break precedent and how they don't guarantee year 2 of contracts and how that's going to be such a big issue for contract negotiations. And then there are reportedly guarantees into year 4 for Ja'Marr Chase, which certainly suggests a structure similar to Justin Jefferson in terms of option bonuses. And we've talked about that on the show. It should help the Bengals to push some of those cap hits off for Ja'Marr Chase into the future. Remains to be seen what it'll look like for T. Higgins. I don't expect it will look identical, but smaller. I don't think that is what we should expect when we look at T. Higgins' contract versus Ja'Marr Chase's contract. I think there will probably be some structural differences, but it is a masterful job from Burrow, Chase, Higgins in terms of playing to their outs to stay together and get contracts that are at least fair. In Ja'Marr's Chase, he's the top paid non-quarterback in the NFL. So more than fair there, right? Like that's exactly what he wanted, and he got what he wanted and deserved. And for T, he gets a deal that you mentioned maybe he didn't sacrifice money, but if he had forced his way to free agency one way or another, i.e., retaining David Mulligetta as his agent, he would have gotten more money. So
Yeah.
he gives up an opportunity to go be a potential number one elsewhere, to earn more money. Although we haven't seen the contracts, we don't know exactly what the incentives look like and everything yet. But it said that with incentives, it gets up to 30 million. So I think it's reasonable to say that T left money on the table, that T left an opportunity to be in the spotlight as the marquee weapon for another team instead of the 1A to Chase's one in Cincinnati on the table. And so I just really commend T for a number of sacrifices here that he's made and endured, really, in terms of having to deal with the uncertainty and two franchise tags and not expecting that this would really come for a long time in Cincinnati, and then getting to that point through some nice use of leverage and nice use of switching agents to get what T really wanted, which was to continue to play for the team that he reminded us on Tuesday he grew up rooting for.
How many 26-year-olds would do this in their line of work? Fire their representation. And that's a harsh word, but he moved on from David Mulligetta. And I asked him I was like, how much of staying here, getting to this moment, went into changing agents? And he said a lot, of course. Now, he didn't elaborate too much, but that's one thing with T. And I think back and you read the tea leaves, and I'll keep using the pun intended there because I feel like we've done that a lot over the past few months. But I go back to a few years ago when he said, oh, well, David works for me. It's not the other way around. And during this process, I think when he saw the door open to staying in Cincinnati, and it was like, okay, well, how do I do it? And by the way, it worked. He still got guarantees in year 2. It's not like he didn't get, they didn't break precedent for him. It's not like he's sacrificing a ton. To your point, I agree with you. I think he would have gotten $35 million per year from the Patriots. Like, I think that's pretty realistic because of the number of teams that would have been in on him. And so instead of that and having to go that route and go to free agency, he said, nope, I don't want to do that. I want to figure this out. And so he moves on from David. He goes to Rocky in December. Joe makes those comments knowing the move. And one step goes to the next step, to the next step, to the next step. And suddenly in mid-March, this isn't June. It's not July. We're not past OTAs. So for all parties to come together and get this done now, that is significant. Regardless of what you think about free agency and what they've done or they haven't done. That's certainly significant, no doubt.
And we got to the joint press conference, which was like fan fiction stuff for a little bit, and then turned into, oh, actually, we're going to meet up when we've agreed to this, and we're going to put it out to the internet together, and then we're going to fly to Cincinnati together, then we're going to sign our contracts one after the other. Got to get the photo op. Can't do that side by side, apparently. I mean, they could have. That would have been pretty cool, but they didn't. And then they got to do the press conference together, and I think doing the press conference together was actually an interesting choice. Not the choice is interesting, but it leads to an interesting conversation when those guys are sitting next to each other because of the way they talk about each other, the relationship between Ja'Marr Chase and T. Higgins, and how close those guys are, and what they mean to each other on the field as well. And that's a big part of Ja'Marr's answer when he was talking about why he wanted to make sure T. Higgins was back in the fold, because he was asked about the ultimatum that was reported, like, hey, you can't get me without T. And so let's dive into some of those answers, some of the other details that we got from this press conference as we continue the conversation, and a bit of a celebration coming up next.
Imagine watching your favorite team live, feeling the energy of the crowd and witnessing unforgettable moments. There's nothing like experiencing a big game in person, and getting tickets shouldn't be stressful. That's where Gametime comes in, making it easier than ever to grab last minute tickets at unbeatable prices. They have Gametime Picks, and what Gametime Picks does is it makes it easier to find better value for tickets to sports, concerts, comedy, theater. Maybe you're headed up to Dayton to watch Xavier tomorrow night, or tonight, depending, Wednesday night. Well, Gametime is going to give you the peace of mind with seat views before you buy, no surprise fees, and a lowest price guarantee. You can book with total confidence with Gametime. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code Locked On NFL for $20 off your first purchase. That's LOCKEDON NFL. Locked On NFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
One of the more interesting moments to me, James, during this press conference was there was some question asked about keeping Joe, Ja'Marr, and T together and it making Joe's life easier. And Ja'Marr spoke up and said that it's not just for Joe, it's for me. It makes my life easier. I wanted to keep T here because
Sure.
of the impact that has for Ja'Marr Chase on the football field and the as a product of that, the entire offense when you have both Ja'Marr Chase and T. Higgins on the field.
Yeah, I think that's why I said dumb football people. Because I think that smart football people understand why it makes sense. And you had Greg Cosell of NFL Films. I saw a clip of him, and I don't know what podcast it was on, so forgive me there, but a clip of him talking about how important a second wide receiver is in today's NFL. And I get it. The joke is, James loves wide receivers, all of those things, and that's fine, and it's mostly true. But they're as valuable as they've.
True. Come on.
But they're the most valuable they've ever been in the history of the sport. Like that part is also true. And so when you roll out two guys and you get off the bus where you have the most accurate quarterback in the NFL and arguably the best quarterback in the NFL, who I would say is the best receiver in the NFL. He's more complete than anyone else. And then a guy in T. Higgins, who would have been a number one on at least 10 teams that were trying to pay him in free agency, could have been more. That's really scary. That's a lot to deal with. And they make each other's lives easier. Of course they want to be together. And it's easy to see the path to them being in contention year in and year out. And I think that's the other element here. I don't think that this was oh yeah, he makes my life easier because I don't face as many double teams and I can get single coverage and put up stats. I think they understand from a football standpoint, they can be more successful as a team together. And when one is out, I'll go back to the Pittsburgh game. It got really ugly when T. Higgins got nicked up and was out. That offense dropped. That's the last time we saw the Bengals on the field, and they found a way to win. Defense finished the game there. A lot of people would probably forget that. So this offense, it's a huge part, obviously, of what they do. T. Higgins is a huge part of that. And I'm glad that Ja'Marr spoke up about the 1A part of it too, the 1A element, when it was like, oh, well, you're the highest paid number 2. And I forget who asked that. And before T could answer, who he clearly didn't want to be referred to that way anyway. But Ja'Marr said, no, 1A. And I get it because Joe views it that way. The Bengals view it that way. And that's why T got paid the way he did.
Underlining the importance for T. Higgins to the offense, obviously, right? That was Greg Cosell on the Ross Tucker podcast talking about how in modern NFL defensive structures with all the too high stuff you have, just naturally, it's much easier to cloud a receiver, to double a receiver when that's the only threat in the passing game. And so when you have that second guy, it really forces defenses to make a choice and opens up that much more for you offensively. And Mina Kimes, who we've had on the show before, and I know that Bengals fans have varying opinions of Mina Kimes, but she also pointed out that for the type of offense that Joe Burrow likes to play, where he wants to get multiple receivers out on the field, figure out where the mismatch is, figure out where the vulnerability in the coverage is, and then get the ball to a receiver, having more dynamic playmakers who can do things to reward him for getting them the ball on time in a weakness of the defense, it makes more sense for that kind of offense than, say, San Francisco offense or a Detroit offense where you're doing so much schematically and funneling throws to a specific point, and your quarterback is kind of an extension of like doing exactly what the play is prescribed to be, right? The Bengals don't go like that on offense. The play doesn't tell the quarterback where the ball is going to go. The play tells the quarterback what the options are. The quarterback figures out where the ball is going to go. And so when you have those kinds of receivers, a 1 and 1A, that can be reliable in those situations, that can do more with the ball in their hands, that can threaten defenses more diversely and can beat one-on-one coverage so consistently, that makes more sense for the style of offense the Bengals are running that is asking, okay, we're gonna put some concepts out there because our quarterback is a superhuman in terms of his processing ability. And if you can reward that, we're going to be a very productive offense. And we saw a lot of that last year, right? That's the way they ran the offense. They introduced the 12 personnel stuff a little bit, but it was still Joe Burrow's offense doing Joe Burrow things.
Yeah, for sure. And that's it. Like how easy, how hard would it be to find the next T? Or are you going to just completely revamp your offense? Everyone's talking about how great the offense is. It isn't great without T. It's just, it might be solid. It might be good, but it would have to evolve. It would have to change a ton. And that's why the quickest way to them getting back in championship contention included T. Higgins. Just did. Now, does that mean they need to do other stuff? I think we both agree. And everyone that's listening and watching every day knows how we feel about that. But this was something that they had to get done. And just because it's X amount of dollars or X amount of cap space, and we still don't know exactly what that's going to look like, don't buy oh my goodness, the Bengals aren't going to be able to function. They were always going to have to draft well. They were always regardless. If they don't pay T, guess what? They're still going to have to be great in the draft. And they were going to have to replace a guy that I'm not sure exists in this year's draft. Speaking of the wide receivers, like I don't know if they're there. So I think that this celebrate it. And the other thing that I thought, one of the other takeaways I have from the press conference, Jake, is just how quiet Ja'Marr was. Ja'Marr didn't say a lot. And I think it was very, yep, I expected this to get done. Hasn't fully set in. I think he's going to go celebrate. I think they both are. You mentioned you're not sure where they're at. I think I do know. I think they're headed to their airport. They're getting on that private jet and going somewhere warm. So I don't think they're going to be in Cincinnati long, which is the ultimate boss move. You fly in on a private jet, sign a multi, $100+ million contract, both of them, and then you fly out. That's it's got to be a feeling that you're only going to get once in your life, probably in their case, maybe twice, I guess.
Maybe twice for
certainly
that.
once.
Yeah,
maybe.
Maybe they have a chance,
but it's got to be a hell of a feeling. Got to be a hell of a feeling, right?
No doubt about that. Yeah, I don't think there's any semblance of an argument about that. And congratulations to those guys. I did notice the disparity in who was talking the most, and I thought that was an interesting bit. I think Ja'Marr was probably thankful for someone else to be up there. He's used to meeting with you guys at this point. He's done it a little bit. T's obviously talked to you guys in the locker room throughout his career in Cincinnati, but T got to talk about the fish tank he wants to put in his wall, and
he's never done. He's never done the podium. That was his first time, because he was drafted COVID year. So there was never a podium T, and so that had to feel pretty cool for him.
And Ja'Marr got to talk about how he liked Cincinnati because his quarterback is in Cincinnati and because T is in Cincinnati, and had some things to say about the food that we don't need to get into here, referencing that he's from New Orleans. I thought it was really funny. Talked about how he likes Cincinnati because he can stay focused on the football. I thought it was hilarious. I love Jamar's sense of humor and the way that he's just like that and very
food
honest.
in New Orleans is awesome. So it is going to be a step down. Like anywhere he went outside of a few cities would have been a step down food wise from New Orleans. And by the way, they would have those few cities would have came with major distractions. So it worked out well.
I just think it's funny. I personally got a kick out of the Ja'Marr quotes. Let's wrap up here, James, with T and Ja'Marr Chase, official. James still recording from Paycor Stadium, coming up next.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the Bracket Breakdown.
Locked
On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
For those wondering, I've relocated. Now I'm in the parking lot at Paycor Stadium. So if you hear a little wind, that's why.
or beeping because gates are opening and closing. Because there's big business going on here at Paycor Stadium. Honestly, I was really excited, or at least laughed at. I don't know if I was excited, but I was curious to see what the quotes would read from Mike Brown, from Zach Taylor. Obviously, Zach Taylor made a statement at the jump, but Duke Tobin in his statement was just awesome, Jake. He said, quote, "The Bengals have a long history of drafting and retaining elite wide receivers, and we're happy to continue that tradition with Ja'Marr and T. We are known for our explosive, high-scoring offense, and Ja'Marr and T are a big part of that identity. They earn these extensions with their abilities and promise for the future. And here's the elite, just drop the mic moment. We have our receivers. The rest of the league can go find their own," which is a callback, obviously, to if you want a receiver, go find your own. The NFL Combine 2 years ago with the T. Higgins trade rumors. So, yeah, the Bengals keeping their receivers, and Duke Tobin says go find your own.
Yeah, the bit of redemption here for Duke Tobin after the Combine comments, although there's still work to be done to make good on everything he said at the Combine, but he gets to circle back to the go find your own. And that's a bit of a moment for Duke Tobin. Good for him. And he's right. The Bengals do have a good tradition of retaining elite wide receivers, largely doing a good job of keeping their guys at the top of the market. And this is just another example. I also liked Mike Brown pointing out that with Joe Burrow, T. Higgins, and Ja'Marr Chase, quote, "We have a very potent offense that gives us a foundation to win games," going on to say the obvious. It's hard to cover both of them. And that's what we're talking about when we're talking about the way this team is built. And Mike Brown tacitly acknowledging all of the criticisms out there right now, whether he's heard them directly or just imagines them because he understands, he's been in this business for a long time, that it is unusual to pay two receivers your second and third biggest contracts on the football team. Maybe your biggest contract, maybe your second biggest contract. Sure, they've done that in the past, AJ Green, and they've had high paid wide receivers throughout their history since Mike Brown took over. But I think there is an acknowledgement here that we're doing this a little bit differently. We're giving ourselves a crazy set of offensive firepower and weapons, and that's going to be the foundation of our football team. We're going to have to build around those guys. And so where people are arguing about the Bengals team building approach here, this is what they're saying instead is like, okay, we're going to have this set of guys on offense. That is who we're built through. That's what we've been saying for the last few days here is they have an elite offense with these guys. They need to figure out guard, but they had an elite offense just last year with T. Higgins, Ja'Marr Chase, and even Mike Gesicki leading the way here and keeping that foundation in place and needing to hit in the draft to improve around them is where the Bengals are now with a little bit of work left to do in free agency. So an interesting set of quotes there between Mike Brown and Duke Tobin, I thought.
Yeah, a lot of work. Just since I'm here and I've said it all week, a lot of work needs to be done in the building behind me. There we go. There we go. We could kind of see the building. There we go. Building behind me. I was trying to get the Paycor logo, and it just took way too long for me to get it in frame for those listening and not able to see here on YouTube. I apologize for the wind in advance. But the good news is I think there are good players that they could add. One is still on their roster, Trey Hendrickson. They were asked about Trey, and T. Higgins did most of the talking here. Ja'Marr gave it a yes, I agree. But they would love to see Trey back. Makes sense. I think they know that the defense needs to be better. Goes without saying. I think the whole world knows it. That again doesn't mean that you don't keep your best players on offense because your defense needs help. But yeah, getting something done with Trey certainly, I would say, needs to be the focus. We talked a lot about it yesterday for those wondering. I'm just not sure that it's going to come together quick. It could. Not sure it will.
It always can. It just takes the right numbers, getting to the right people, getting onto the right piece of paper, and then it can come together just like that. We'll see what happens there. It does seem like there's a lot of smoke from national reporters, multiple national reporters, that is the Bengals' next point of emphasis is trying to figure it out with Trey Hendrickson, trying to get back to the table with Trey Hendrickson. And in addition to that, we will continue to be a broken record on this. That there are a couple of external moves we would like to see them make. We won't list all the players again, but nothing has changed as far as I know about the players that we talked about in the last 2 days, James, on this show, in this segment, in this part of the show. that are players still out there that can improve the team. So we'll see what happens there. We'll continue to have you covered, of course, here on Locked On Bengals as more news develops here late now in week 2 of the free agency period. Until then, thanks for listening to this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Hoo day, and have a good one.